All right, so we're going to look at the Northern Renaissance, and we're going to see that it's going to take some aspects of the Italian Renaissance and alter it to fit what their view of this rebirth is all about. So in the Northern Renaissance, with the beginning, this whole idea that England and France are now unified nations. And one thing to keep in mind that when we had looked at the 100 Years' War, that was really tearing apart England and France. Well, they had to recover from that. Not only with that recovery from the 100 Years' War, but England itself also had to deal with the War of the Roses, which brought the Tudors into power with Henry VII. So now that England and France have created unification within their own land, and we're going to look and see how they both achieved that next week when we look at the new monarchies. Now the monarchs can do what the princes in the Italian city-states were doing, and that's actually starting to sponsor arts. And so now you're going to have some of the great artists who were in Italy starting to migrate out of the Italian city-states because they're going to be offered positions within England or France to create works for those monarchies. So why exactly are they even leaving Italy? Well, we know from looking at the political instability in Italy and the bringing in of the Habsburgs and bringing in France that Italy is in turmoil, and it's going to be in political turmoil for quite some time. So war is going to be one reason why, or a way how all of these Renaissance ideas are going to spread outside of Italy, because people are going to flee, and you're going to have the artists who are going to venture somewhere else where they can actually get a commission to do works of art. Travel. People are traveling. We know with Venice being the center of trade from the East, working with the Ottoman Empire, and then spreading everything else to the rest of Europe, that there's a lot of travel going back and forth. So when people catch ideas from one area, then they take them to another, or they move from one place and they take those ideas to another. And then, of course, the commissioned artists that will be offered positions if they would leave Italy in order to take on a position in someone else's kingdom. But one thing I want you to really note, what makes the Northern Renaissance distinctive? What makes it different than the Italian Renaissance? I mean, we looked at the Italian Renaissance and they really embraced the secular world, things that were non-religious. They embraced mythology, they embraced Roman history, and they also still focused on Christianity. Well, the Northern Renaissance is going to take that idea of civic humanism and Christian humanism to a different level. So their idea of reading those classical manuscripts, it wasn't necessarily focusing on the things about law or living life to the fullest. They were focusing more on the ancient Christian texts, the ancient Greek texts, Roman, regarding Christianity. So we're definitely going to see more of a religious focus rather than secular. And since they are looking at it with a religious standpoint, they are going to be very critical about the things that are taking place down in the Italian city-states. They're also going to focus on social reform. So how can we improve our society? Because that was one of those humanist values that we do need to make improvements. We do need to make a better world, but it's going to be based on Christian values. And what we're really going to see here, this distinctive feature in the Northern Renaissance, is going to be what triggers the Reformation. So let's talk about Erasmus. Now, we'll look at him a little bit more when we get to the Reformation, because he's going to have some word choices for Martin Luther. But Erasmus was one of the greatest figures of the Renaissance humanist movement. He was a member of the clergy. He definitely wanted to point out that, there were some issues. There's issues with what was going on with society, and there's issues with what was going on in the church. And his work, The Praise of Folly, was actually written to make his friend Sir Thomas More, and we'll look at Sir Thomas More in a moment, to amuse his friend. And It's a mixture of some fantasy, there's satire in it, and it pokes fun at greedy merchants. And again, think about this. So you're having the northern people viewing what's going on in Italy, and you see that rising of that merchant class and trying to get a hold of money. And with that money, they get to actually gain some wealth and prestige. Well, poking fun at that particular group in society. The heart-sick lovers, drunkenness that was going on, and also pompous priests. So one of the things about Erasmus was that being a part of the clergy, he was very much aware of the corruption in the church, some of the issues that was going on in the church, but he wasn't producing necessarily works where it was going to go out to every single person to read. But this did attract some attention, and it did attract some criticism. Sir Thomas More was from England, and he was actually one of Henry VIII's advisors. He will also be one of Henry VIII's advisors who will lose his head because he will not be able to sign the Act of Supremacy, which would make Henry, or the monarch, the head of the Church of England. He definitely was very aware that under English law, there were certain things that the king to do, but he had told Henry's attorney, Thomas Cromwell, not the same one that we will look at a little later, that you should never tell the king what he can do, only what he should do. Because if you tell him what he can do, then there's no way you're going to be able to rein him in. And Cromwell's going to do that. For Sir Thomas More, he too was a devout person to the Catholic Church. Really, if he could have had his way, he would have just spent his life dedicated to the church. But he got married and saw that the marriage itself was to reproduce and to have children. But as one of our writers from the Northern Renaissance, one of the works that we really look at with Thomas More is his book Utopia, and pretty much this is nowhere. So we're looking at this imaginary land, so an island nation where thousands of people live in peace and harmony, and men and women are both educated, and property is communal. Oh goodness, we're going to talk about that communal stuff a little later on. But looking at these loving people and exploring the theories and realities between war, political conflicts, social tensions, redistribution, and looking at the day-to-day lives of just citizens being free from fear, oppression, violence, and suffering, which is completely opposite of what was going on during that time in the world and in England, particularly with Henry VIII. So it did bring up some question, and Thomas More was someone who stood very strong behind his convictions and was willing to lose his head for them, which is what actually ends up happening with Sir Thomas More. Francois Rabelais is from France, and the works that he's known for, and he has a few others, but Gargantua and Pantagruel. And I remember reading these in college, and I thought they were the most bizarre books ever. But again, you're looking at satires. It is a comic adventure that does poke fun at society, but just like all satires, and you're going to get that with Praise of Folly. You're going to see things in Utopia. Gargantua and Pantagruel is going to do the same thing, and we'll also see it when we get to the Enlightenment with Voltaire's Candide, that they are addressing serious points in society, that they want people, or at least intellectuals, the ones who are reading these works, to stop and think, because what's being described as a ha 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 funny little story, everyone knows while they're reading it that these are things that actually were taking place, and they know who was involved. With Gargantua and Pantagruel, you're seeing a story of Gargantua is a young giant who becomes a cultured Christian knight, And Pantagruel is Gargantua's bookish son who becomes this Renaissance Socrates. And then he has this guide that is taking him around, who's actually not exactly the most intelligent guide, but it's his loving little companion that goes along with him. It was, like I said, it was a bizarre story that we had read. And if memory serves correctly, the son was born from like a headache and came out of the father's head, which brings in some of that mythology that we saw with the Italian Renaissance. Shakespeare, you're going to see him more with like the Elizabethan side of the Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance. And so we do have him from England. And I included him in here only because of his works do fall within that, but particularly Hamlet. And we know that Hamlet is not actually, the most fun-loving story to read, but he embodies this Renaissance man, or the characteristics of what a Renaissance man would be. But we also know that there is tragedy within that story. All right, so that is it for our our Northern Renaissance. And so now you have the rest of the period to work on whichever item you need to complete. So you have time to read the prints, to start working on your book review, or maybe you want to do your vocab notebook. You also have your Socratic seminar packet. And who knows, maybe one or two of you want to say, hey, I'm going to start looking at that take-home test. Completely up to you. You guys have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday. Bye.